I'm Sydney Swisher, and I am a multimedia artist that paints on fabric.
Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Art, the podcast where we get up close and personal with women from around the world of visual arts. This is Season 2, Episode 40. My guest this week is the multimedia artist Sydney Swisher, whose work on fabric creates a unique dimension to weaving photography and digital art with textiles. Her tapestries explore memory, materiality, and machine intelligence as she references family photos to generate locations based on descriptions of childhood memories. Sydney was born in Oney, Illinois in 1994, the oldest of 3 children. She has a sister, Macy, and a brother, Sutton. She comes from a family of educators. Her mother, Melissa, was a kindergarten teacher, and her father, Martin, a high school science teacher. But it was a BA in mass communications, studying TV and radio, with a minor in art, that Sydney chose at the Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, from where she graduated in 2016. Her internships included graphic design, while photographing weddings would help her develop her skills as a photographer. Sydney returned to Illinois to focus on her art career, and her first solo exhibition, Fabricate, was shown in Peoria, Illinois in March 2024. She is currently preparing for a new show in Chicago in October 2024. Sydney and her husband Nash live in Newton, Illinois, with their 2 whippets. Sydney, welcome to the podcast. Lovely to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Are we taking you away from the studio? Are you in there every day?
I am sitting in it right now, so you're actually not. I am where I'm working every single day.
Set the scene for us. What kind of light do you have in there?
Okay, so I've got a little bit of light coming in from 2 different windows. If you want to know the reality of how messy the scene is, I am trying to construct a new painting. So behind me are tons of fabric pieces taking up most of my couch, as well as a few canvases. So I can't say it's super organized right now. It's a little messy, but a few things in progress. So it's usually how it is.
So artists often have a kind of a transition from, daily life when they go into the studio to get in the right headspace and so on. But it sounds like working with materials, choosing that fabric might be a different kind of preparation. How does it look for you?
Yes. So good question. I feel like, so number one, I thrift these fabrics. So when I go and I thrift, I'm looking for clothes. I'm looking for all kinds of thrifting things. But specifically when I'm sourcing these fabrics, when I'm out and about, I'm thinking specifically of just how they make me feel. I'm trying to look at them and think of some recollections of spaces. So a lot of that process goes outside of the studio. As far as getting into a specific headspace, right now I'm working in my home, in an office room. So that's something I've actually been struggling with a little bit, is getting in and out of that headspace, especially when you're home, kind of turning off, trying to come up with an idea. But so much of this is going out and trying to find pieces that are going to create the next piece. So I guess that headspace I'm carrying it pretty frequently.
So what do you have to have in that space then to be creative? Do you kind of transition into some type of music or podcasts, or what kind of atmosphere do you like? Because I know you're married to a musician, so music is in the house.
Yes, a lot of music is in the house. He collects vinyl records, so we are not without that. Kind of nice that, he can play that. Small house, I can hear it throughout the house, but definitely music, definitely podcasts. I really like a lot of podcasts based on spirituality. I like a lot of things that come to broader ideas. A lot of my work is centered around a lot of these broader ideas of human connection and spirituality. So I have found that if I'm listening to a podcast, I'm listening to a good conversation around some of these topics, it gets me a lot more motivated to jump on the work. But podcasts and music most of the time.
So what you're doing in including the fabric into your artwork is a fascinating process. And the technicalities of that are probably for another podcast. But when I ask my guests, to name some of their favorite female artists in visual arts, and their suggestions are wide and varied. But there's one name that came up to me that you mentioned was Megan Lewis, and you said that every time you're asked about painting on fabric, you bring up her name. What is it about Megan Lewis's and the inspiration that she's been for you?
Yes. So basically, I kind of fumbled into using fabric as my canvas. I am self-taught. I've always seen it as just kind of fumbling. It was moving into oil painting was very much just like a pandemic. I had the time and I really wanted to focus on it. I honestly didn't feel that strong about my technique as a painter. So I started oil painting. I started learning a lot of the pieces of making a canvas, of how to wrap it, I was just painting on the cheap dollar store canvases that were really rough. And I started realizing you can gesso, you can add cloth. So I started thrifting cloth to try to make my own canvases. It turned into a bit of I guess any fabric will do. In doing my research of that, and trying to play with fabric for myself, I found the work of Megan Lewis, who paints on fabric. And I was very inspired by how she incorporates it and the flatness of some of the fabric into some of her figures. It reminds me a lot of what Kehinde Wiley is doing while he paints all of his patterns. She seemed to just kind of take that quick step to just having the pattern already there and then incorporating her figures into it. And so she was the first person to give, I found online and gave me that confirmation, oh, this is possible. And wow, the possibilities are kind of endless here.
And I'm sure you're exploring the possibilities fully then in what you're doing with your fabric. But I want to go back, if I may, to how your art career began. But you were born in Olney, Illinois, in 1994, and your parents were teachers. So was that something that you ever considered doing before you got into art?
So I don't really know that many other people in my family had a serious interest in art. I know my grandma was she was a seamstress. She would make clothing for us. She had craft boxes. My parents are both creative in their own ways, but when it comes to actually just kind of making paintings, making a lot of these things, that's not something that they were focused on, but they still very, very, very much supported my interest in it. I really want to focus on how much them being teachers inspired me through how they opened my world up to all these different possibilities. I really think that I was always interested in art. I was always interested in crafts. I was always interested in just trying to make things and troubleshoot it and put pieces of things together. But they really opened up my world by taking me to museums. Me and my siblings, we went to so many museums, to art museums, science museums. They very much wanted to just open the world up to us at what everyone else is doing, all of these possibilities. Olney is a pretty small town, rural in southern Illinois, and that was very important for them to have our worlds opened up that way.
You mentioned your siblings. You're the oldest of three.
Yeah.
So with that, did that come with any privileges at all, or were you the leader of the pack?
I think if my sister was here, she'd give a resounding yes, probably. I definitely from a young age had a vision for how I would like certain things to go. I definitely, when I had, creative ideas in mind, when we'd make little videos and stuff, being the oldest, I was kind of definitely the director there.
What kind of a child were you? What were your interests?
Oh, I mean, definitely most anything creative. I have so many memories of going to my grandparents' house, and my poor grandma, I would just raid her craft room. Like it probably looked like taking these sewing boxes of just, loose material and like dumping them on the ground, the rhinestones, and trying to make stuff. She put up with a lot with me wanting to do that every time I was at her house. I say my mom was a kindergarten teacher. She had a craft box in her room. And I remember every day after school just raiding that craft box, trying to make things. I just wanted to make things in any way. I remember trying to write stories, take pictures, take videos. I very much was just constantly had that creative urge to do something. And yeah, back to the older sister thing. And when I had a vision in mind, I was very set on the way my vision was going to come to fruition.
And what kind of environment did you grow up in? Were you in an urban or rural environment?
I say rural, but we were in town. So we lived right across the street from some cousins of mine and some neighbors. So it was very wonderful. If I'm being honest, it was great to, there was a lot of kids in the neighborhood, constantly going out, playing, doing things every day. I do feel like our parents encouraged us to do whatever creative thing wanted to do. If my sister wanted to come up with dances, if we wanted to like do a lemonade stand, it was definitely not an urban environment, still very small town, but we were not very far from the main street, not very far from a movie theater. It was kind of a very perfect little small town area.
And what kind of influences do you think you adapted from your parents? Because often we pick up certain, interests from our parents and influences. And apart from the art, I'm wondering what else beyond the art world and the craft world were interesting you? Was it sport? Was it music? Was it dance?
Definitely not sport or dance. I have to laugh because my family's probably going to laugh at that one. Neither of those. Dance is probably definitely my sister. My brother and sister, my sister's an occupational therapist and my brother's a physical therapist. So they very much took the sports level of things. I was a little bit more black sheep. I think that, again, so much of how my parents influenced me were not shying away from a lot of broad concepts and trying to expand our mind in certain ways. My dad, being a biology teacher, very interested in travel, very interested in museums. He did a great job of just asking the right questions to kind of get our mind turning a little bit. He very much wasn't one to tell you, this is how I think and you should think the same way. Something I really, really admire about him is more so like opening a conversation for us to develop our own critical thinking skills. He wanted not to just tell us how to think about things. He wanted to show us all the different ways and all the different influences of people. And my mom is very much the same way. She's a kindergarten teacher and she's very much open to the broad world of everything. I mean, they love travel. Right now, they're in Alaska. They're retired. So who knows if I'll see them? Like they're going to be gone like all the time. But she was the same as far as just like being very open for these conversations that, get your mind working. She also, I get from her a lot of the not being afraid of change, not being afraid to, hey, it's the weekend, let's paint the walls of our house, or hey, your dad's gone, let's rip up the carpet to show these hardwood floors. Let's change up the environment a bit. So both of them are very flexible people, I would say.
So were you a confident, outgoing child?
I think around middle school I was. I think that, I probably leaned a little bossy because I'm assuming my siblings and cousins are going to hear this. So if I had a certain, vision for things, as a child, I did some plays in middle school. Around high school is where I do feel like I took a step back. Some of those teenage years, very reserved. There was definitely that time of just kind of like, still having a creative drive, but the teenage years introduced some levels of embarrassment about things, some confident issues. And I do feel like as I've entered into my 20s and gone into more, adulthood, that started coming back. A little bit more of that confidence in myself, it feels like a cycle, but the teenage years, they're a little rough for everybody.
They certainly are. I want to talk about your education at college next, but I'm curious because you were exposed to the museums and galleries and the wider world of visual arts. Who was influencing you? Whose art was it that you were particularly interested in? And were there any names of artists that you were following in any way and influencing you?
My parents did take us to some art museums that they were mostly focused on like history and science museums. When it comes to some of my art education, I'm a little bit I'm not super able to rattle off a list of names. I think I kind of come from the internet generation to where, if I'm being honest, a lot of my influences came from seeing stuff through social media, through Tumblr specifically. Okay, if we're going to talk about that teenage time, I'm a Tumblr kid. That's going to mean something to some of your listeners. So a lot of the images and influences, I know that specifically some of the first art I saw that I attached and remembered a name of was Gregory Crewdson. I was very influenced by photography first. He makes these very cinematic scenes. A lot of how he makes these dreamlike kind of nostalgic spaces, I'm so heavily influenced by. That then moved to Todd Hido. And he, does the same thing. I was very inspired by how these very simple photos of very dreamy situations just kind of, it did something to where I was like, whoa, what's that? Who did that? As well as Holly Andrews, all of these photographers specifically around the Tumblr era were some of my biggest influences throughout high school.
Now, education, it seems like that was almost inevitable that you would be drawn to something that you were particularly interested in as a child, and photography was one of them. But you studied mass communications at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. How did that decision come about as to what career path you would take through education?
Like I said, my parents, very supportive, very just kind of even though fine art and art wasn't necessarily something they're familiar with in their wheelhouse, still very supportive. But coming along at the end of high school, the conversation turns a little bit more into, okay, but how are you going to make money? Kind of a thing. So, coming from the small town I come from, you don't really see a lot of influences that are actually making a career out of art. I graduated high school in 2013. So a lot of this being able to build a career online was still just kind of formulating, I feel. So through some conversations with my parents, we settled on, advertising, graphic design. I have a very big interest in just kind of it basically art in any medium. So I was, very Photoshop, I was becoming super interested in. But I started focusing more on photography and video. Video is something that I started feeling that maybe that could actually have a career out of. So I went to Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and I studied, TV radio program. So, but I did have a minor in fine art, so I didn't take a ton of art classes. I think I had one art history class. I never got a painting class. I had a life drawing class, and obviously I love those classes. And I still learned a bit as far as incorporating digital work, learning gestural things as far as drawing goes. But when it came to mass comm, that decision came a little bit more from, okay, but how are you going to make money? Kind of a thing.
And what did you think when you were graduating? Then what year did you graduate?
Oh gosh, you got me thinking. 2016, I think. I think I graduated in 2016. If I'm being honest, the financial part of this was pretty prevalent in a lot of my decisions. I had two parents that are both teachers. But a lot of people will understand that doesn't necessarily mean they were raking in millions of dollars. So the reality of you're going to need to make some money. It could be like a struggle following artistic pursuits. I don't really have that crazy huge of a backing to fail at something like that. So yeah, graduation, it became, I did a couple of internships. And I actually worked for a heating and cooling company for a little bit. I did some logos for them. I made some van wraps for them. And then I worked to doing corporate graphic design.
And where was that? Was that all in Illinois, or did you travel at all?
I was in St. Louis. So yes, SIUE is in the Edwardsville area, around the St. Louis area. So I was in the St. Louis area for a bit. I can go ahead and fast forward to how I got back here, essentially. So the opportunity to work from home came up. So we were able to move back here, a bit lower cost of living. And so I have luckily been able to be a work from home graphic designer pre-pandemic. I actually did that like about a half year before the pandemic, which is kind of crazy. It was like all of a sudden I was the only one working from home, and then the entire world is working from home. It was kind of weird how that happened.
Well, college life, of course, brings with it many influences as well in terms of politics and literature and stuff like this, and religion. You talked about being spiritual. What kind of influences did you take from college into your adult life?
So I was raised Catholic. My mom comes from a pretty Catholic family. And if I'm going to dig a little bit more into that kind of high school time, that kind of doubting time, it was a pretty big time of struggle for me. I like to go pretty deep with a lot of these thoughts of things. So in high school already, I really think so much of this is the influence of the internet, of the influence of being able to be open to a lot of these broader concepts. It opened up a lot of doubt for a small town, religious person at that time. So I was already very much interested in just kind of exploring every option. We could kind of get a little bit more into, I want my art to live in this gray area. I think I kind of frustrate people sometimes with how much I kind of live in that gray area of, oh, well, it could be this, it could be this. So spirituality was already something that I was questioning. It's not necessarily like I went to college and my foundation got rocked. But I'm trying to think of any specific classes that might have opened my mind to things. This isn't necessarily a conversation with religion and spirituality, but it's very interesting to look back on some of the early mass communication classes when it comes to just the internet, when it comes to misinformation, which is kind of crazy that they were talking about it way back in 2014. What this means for connecting people, a lot of ethical concerns as we go into this new media landscape. So yeah, that's not exactly spirituality, but it's one thing I remember college really opening my mind to, is a lot of these weird gray area questions as far as like, where are we going with this new digital landscape we find ourselves in?
What would your teachers have said about you?
Oh my, what would they have said? maybe that I'm pretty driven, I would assume. I tend to maybe take assignments a little seriously about trying my best, I would think. It's interesting that and when I talk about my childhood, I talk about being a little bit of a, bossy. But in some of these college settings, I definitely wouldn't say I was a standout person. I definitely would say I kind of was more reserved, especially in the TV video setting of, working in a group, collaborating. A lot of the strong personalities kind of like will be the ones commanding the camera a bit. I definitely wasn't one of those louder, stronger personalities at that time. But I hope that they would say I gave it my all, because I feel like in a lot of projects that were presenting to me, most of the time, if I care about it, I'm I'm really going to give it my all.
And were there any particular mentors or teachers that you would say shaped your career or your maybe early ambitions in college?
Yes. So I had one particular video teacher, Corey Byers, and he, he invited me to do a few things as far as some documentaries they were involved in. He definitely was a great coach as far as some of the advertising work I was looking at. I think he took note of my ambition with a lot of these things. And, he was just a great resource for noticing that in me and trying to just kind of like coax a few different life paths essentially I could take with this. And as well, I had one drawing instructor. I took a life drawing class, and it was one of my favorite classes I've ever taken. And there were so many things when it came to visual arts that he was able to guide me in. I like I said, I always wanted to be creative. I wanted to be creative in any medium. In college, it was focused specifically on the camera and video. But so I just didn't feel very confident in a lot of my skills when it came to drawing and fine art. I wasn't focused in it at the time. There were so many amazing things he showed me in that class. It was the first time I had done life drawing gestural work. So the way he was, coaxing how to train our brains to visualize shapes, he started noticing that I really have a problem when it comes to just organic form, the human form. You can look at my paintings. I don't paint a lot of people, but I paint a lot of places. I paint a lot of architecture, structures of things, homes. And he started noticing that there was a disconnect to where when we were doing 2-point perspective, hey, that's my jam. I love 2-point perspective. I can do that all day. But when we started doing more organic shapes, when we started doing muscles, I really appreciate that he noticed this, and he worked with me to develop a way to almost see the human form as geometry, almost like deconstructing it down to certain shapes. And it helped me so much. And he was an incredible artist. And so, yeah, I was really influenced by him.
In terms of shaping then the way you were embracing art and you were ingesting art, I would say, and how then you translate that to your own work, is it more of spiritual, or do you get inspiration from the outside world, something more tangible? Where would you say your creative process comes from? What's the catalyst for it?
Okay. Let me try to condense this down. Okay, I'm gonna go back and maybe talk a little bit about why I feel the photography of Gregory Crewdson impacted me so much. There's something about his work that I'm so enamored by, work that takes you to a space that you feel like, I feel like I've been there before. This almost feels like home. This almost feels a little bit uncanny. I'm so enamored by seeing something that correctly shows a space that you hold such emotion to, if that makes sense. His work you just see it, and it's giving you a setting. It's giving you just kind of this Midwestern landscape that feels so familiar, but there's such a story to it. So a lot of my work comes from just kind of this vague, uncanny, dreamlike place. I'm very inspired by a lot of these visuals of spaces that you can equate maybe where you were at that point in time to. So if the fabric kind of brings it out of me and I just kind of start thinking of a space, I work that way, or I work opposite to where I'm like, I really just have just this vision of an amalgamation almost of like, who knows if I dreamt it, who knows if it was real. It almost feels like when you have a dream, and once you're done with the dream, you're like, oh, I was in a room and there was shag carpet and there was like a yellow window. But you can kind of trace your mind back to like, oh, that came from like my aunt's house. That came from this location. All these pieces made an amalgamation of a place. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just kind of like take all these amalgamations of pieces. And if I'm getting really woo-woo spiritual about it, a lot of my work, I want to be focused around how all of these random experiences, all these random places, and all these random influences of other people have essentially built who you are today and what has crafted you. So I hope I answered your question. It comes from a lot of this just kind of subconscious realm. And I hope that with my work, I'm trying to kind of tap into some kind of a collective human dreamlike subconscious thing.
And some might say there's a romanticism to this. Maybe there's a romantic in you that's coming out. So I'm wondering, was the college student, Sid Swisher, were you the party girl? What was the social life like and those social influences that have brought you to where you are today?
I don't think I was party girl. I hung around, like a few people. I feel like a lot of people that came from a lot of different kind of backgrounds of what was going on. I mean, like, I really appreciated a lot of the mass comm students and a lot of just kind of the creativity that came with that. I feel very at home with a lot of people that are ready to jump on things, have an idea, be very creative about it. We did what is that called? Where you got to make a movie in like 48 hours, stuff like that. So, I definitely have found myself around maybe more of people that lean a little bit more romantic and having a vision with their work. I mean, my husband, my boyfriend at the time, I did date him throughout college. He's a musician. He writes his own music. I very much appreciate and want to incorporate myself with people who are equally driven to just wanting to create things, wanting to like share their story in certain ways.
So just following the trajectory of your journey then from college, if you met your husband Nash in college, at what point did you become serious and get married and then decide where you were going to live?
I was what a story. We met in community college, so we're going to take it a step back. I went on to college in St. Louis, and but I had met him before I went off to college at St. Louis in community college. I had a friend that I would go to lunch with, and I'd wait in the band lounge for her, and there was a ominous cute guy in the band lounge that I started talking to. And so I went off to college and we started dating. So I'd come home on the weekends to see him because he was still in this area. He, towards the end of college, moved to St. Louis with me and we lived there for a little bit. I got, the corporate graphic design job. I was working more so in St. Louis. But he, he's a very family oriented guy. He really, a lot of our friends were still here back home, you start getting into the routine of, I don't know if I would call it suburban life. I don't know, just like the commuting into the corporate job, the driving home, the busyness. I've always thought I was very much like a city person. I thought like it'd be cool, like we should live downtown St. Louis or so. There's something about, though, once you're actually there, it becomes a little bit monotonous. We started talking a little bit more about, like financially what we'd be able to afford as far as like a home here. And then just as we were kind of like, what's next? Some friends of ours, they put their house up for sale, and it was like a house we've loved so much. Like we've had our eyes on. It's like gorgeous. It's got like a really big backyard. We talked through it and we finally settled on, we can live in our small, tight-knit community, but, we can go to these bigger places and it'll be kind of extra special to go to some of these bigger places. It's something I experienced as a child. I was from a smaller town, but my parents opened the doors to bigger experiences all the time. And they were extra special because it's not here like every single day. You get to see it and it's like new and you get new restaurants. So that's essentially how we came to moving back home. We got married. We had a COVID wedding, 2020. So yeah, that's kind of where we found ourselves today.
Now we've talked about Politics, religion. Well, we didn't talk about politics, but we talked about religion and other influences. But we haven't talked about literature, though. So tell me what kind of a bookworm you might be.
Oh no, I'm a podcast worm. I've listened to some audiobooks. I'm embarrassing. I'm just going to be so real that like, no, I unfortunately I need to be actually sitting down with a book, not just, audio podcast books. But, one of the last, podcasts, audiobooks I've listened to, I think if we're going to go spiritual again, something that I really tie so much to my work and something that's a focus with me in my life anymore is I'm getting really woo woo here. Here we go. Is the whole concept that humans and the human experience is almost an easy description of it is almost that like we're all eyes looking out of the same head, if that kind of makes sense. A lot of these teachings of, the whole golden rule, the whole do to others as they would, you'd want done unto you. But very literally, like you almost are that person. They're just like going through a different life. Some kind of an idea of we all go back to the same mesh of soul soup, if I'm being really, that about it. But I don't know, when you live your life with that general idea that like we genuinely need each other, we're connected to each other on a level that we don't quite understand. I love how deep that is. I love how woo-woo that is. My friend recommended the book Many Lives, Many Masters. It's a book about a therapist who is essentially doing like past life regression with one of his clients. It's a bit out there. I kind of like it for the concept of it all, the concept that we're here to learn from each other. We're on a big karmic wheel. So, that's definitely one that, I'm starting only recently to kind of like listen a bit more to lectures of like Ram Dass, some of those spirituality things. But, unfortunately, I'm like, I need to listen to a lot more books. I'm kind of just listening to podcasts all day, if I'm being honest.
Are you meditative? Is meditation part of your routine?
It's becoming more and more. I feel like whenever I first tried it, I was a little bit like, well, I can't shut my head up. That's my first problem. But you starting to actually understand what people are meaning when they say, just kind of let those thoughts pass, find what works for you, keep the thoughts like you're on a river, let the thought pass you by on the river and it just let it come, let it go. I'm trying to get a lot better about meditation, about specifically taking the time to, do a little bit of yoga, sit with my own thoughts. But again, I am by no means a rigorous meditative person.
You mentioned that you were not sporty in any way, though. So what does exercise look like for you in terms of your lifestyle?
Oh no, you're just exposing me. I walk the dogs. I try to walk the dogs kind of frequently, long walks. I feel like walks are good for so many reasons. As far as like leave your phone at home, just go, like just find a new spot. I'm in a small town here, so I can only find so many new spots, but I'm like, oh, whatever. I've never been down this road. I think I've done most every road in, my town at this point, but, trying to really clear my head, that maybe some meditative stuff comes into that. When I'm doing that. Other than that, I can say some kettlebell stuff and some yoga stuff, but I probably need to be doing more than I am right now, if I'm being honest.
And music? Where does that come in? Apart from Nash, obviously being a musician himself and formerly a band player, are you alone someone that has to have music in the car and does car karaoke or sings in the shower? What does music actually mean to you and your soul?
Oh yeah, very, very, very important. I play some piano, but I am not like a piano player. I'll like learn a little song I like, try to like write a little ditty or something, but I am by no means like a musician. But no, music, very, very important to me. I think, again, there's something to connect visually almost with music. I like a lot of music that has kind of an atmospheric sound. A lot of the music I listen to almost seems to equate with a lot of the art I like, as far as like an uncanniness, almost another kind of realm to it. I really love, I think I shared some Beach House with you, just a very like atmospheric-y kind of synth pop sounds. Basically, music's very necessary for me. It determines your mood. It gets you into a certain groove of things. I think I'm shuffling through songs a little bit quicker than many people who ride with me would like, but I want to get the right vibe down. So I'm kind of specific about the music I'm listening to.
Do you have to have music when you wake up in the morning?
No, I've noticed that I typically have a better day when I do. So maybe I need to like get in the groove of doing that. But no, sometimes I jump right to a podcast, and maybe some more calming music would be that might be a little bit better for me.
You come across as being a very patient, sort of in not introverted, but quiet and in your own space, in your own head, and a patient person. Would that be accurate?
I'm wondering if Nash would laugh at that or not. Because I think it depends. I definitely think there are two sides to me. There's a side that can be pretty out there, pretty how do I say this? Nash is very patient. I almost feel like we work as a yin yang. I almost feel like if we're doing a project, I jump into it with energy. I want to like get right to it. I want to physically problem solve. He's going to sit back and read the instruction manual that like I haven't touched. So there's parts of me that like I can be a little bit bold when it calls for it. But I definitely see that part of me that knows when it needs to take its time to just sit back, be away from people, be very introspective. So I honestly don't know. I feel like I might have a little bit of both, if I'm being honest.
What about the colours of your life? What would your palette be like in terms of how it compares to maybe your interior design and the clothes that you choose, the colour scheme of your life? How does that relate to your art?
Oh, interesting. Oh, I got to think about that. So one thing I will say about my art, because I hope in my art, I am trying to create my memory. I am trying to create my sort of like recollection of a place that, I hope actually serves as not just mine. It's a whole thing. It's a collection of many people's. But something I'm very surprised about is the idea I have in mind. I always want to make much more muted than it turns out. I feel like a lot of other photographers I've been inspired by. I mean, if you look at the work at Holly Andrews and Gregor Crutzen specifically, they have a lot of rich color in there. They have a muted landscape, but there's rich color in there. I would say the same for Todd Hito's is a little bit more muted. I always aim to be like, okay, this one's going to be muted. This one's going to be kind of taken back, and it always gets richer. It seems to always get bolder as I work. And I kind of see that in a lot of ways, I guess. I always try to like stay muted, and it always ends up becoming a lot brighter and richer than maybe I had originally intended. As far as my clothes, I mean, I'm wearing all black all the time. I recently did the whole test your colors with your skin tone. And it came with all these like blues and pastels. And I was like, what? But hey, ever since I started wearing them, it's do your colors, people. It's actually doing something for you. Like I've noticed this light blue actually looks really good. So I'm trying to incorporate brighter colors, all of that. But yeah, there's something about me that always wants to do muted first. And I don't really know why that is.
So how would you describe your art for maybe the elevator pitch? What would that be?
I don't think I'm good at elevator pitches, but I'll try. Well, okay. If I was going to describe my art, so I want these to be a location that's not specific to anybody, but almost serves as a collective memory made of parts of many people is hopefully the the main elevator pitch. If I dig into it a little bit more, I really want it to be a nostalgic, almost kind of like homey, warm location to kind of draw you in. It's made of just a vast variety of different things, different references, different pieces of material that either physically get sewn on there or weaved into it through painting. And I kind of want it to be an expression of so many things, like how we are made as a person, the influences that make us, a lot of things when it comes to the creative process, when it comes to taking from many different people. It kind of reflects a lot on every part of what I've been interested in. It reflects on how I've been interested in crafts, how I've been interested in just trying to piece things together, my photography, my work in digital art, my interest in this new era we're entering with generative AI. And I just want them to serve as almost like a conundrum. I want it to be a very nostalgic place that feels a tiny bit off. I want there to be a little bit of uncanniness to it. Because it's not a specific place. I really want it to live in a gray area, if I'm being honest, be very broad for a lot of different interpretations.
Looking at your work, obviously it's very floral. There's a lot of pretty patterns in there. Does that mean that you're a girly girl with pretty dresses?
Not really. No, I think again, I'm like, oh, there's so many things that I feel like in me as a person and in my art, it's this back and forth, this yin yang of like a very quiet black sheep emo kid leaning like muted, and then another part that's not afraid to be rich and bold. And so it's not that I'm anti floral girly girl, but definitely not most of the time. I'm just wondering, like, I'm hearing my family and friends laughing as you ask some of these questions because I don't think girly girl is at all what anyone's really used to describe me.
Well, I want to go back to the one thing you did just touch on there lightly, because you work in photography as well as painting, of course, and fabrics, a lot of different mediums. But we are in the digital world. Digital world is something that really you live in, I would say. And so how do you embrace AI? How do you figure it into what you're doing and be authentic?
Yes. So I'm going to start from basically how I very first started using this to kind of just like explain my thoughts on it, where it originally started. So, I was a photographer for years. As I transitioned into painting, there's a few different ways that you can construct your reference images. You can kind of photo bash it in Photoshop, take a lot of my references, take different pieces, kind of construct it together. I'm very digital first before it goes onto the canvas. I don't necessarily trust just like the vision I have in my head. I kind of need to see it, confirm it, and then approve it, get it ready for the canvas. I did do just some photos of places around my town. Felt a little bit weird about that. The fact that I did kind of like the Todd Hito thing of just like taking pictures of homes at night feels a little invasive. As I paint them and as I kind of change things, I start kind of wondering about the narrative I'm giving them when it's just like the home of a stranger. I started painting some of my own film photos, some of my own memories. I'm going to be honest, they were falling a little bit flat to me. It wasn't quite how I remembered them. It wasn't really giving me any kind of a certain like feeling. It just, to me, it was just, okay, that's the picture. It's just painted on there. So I wanted to get a lot more into this. I want to paint how I remember it. I was very focused on my great grandparents' home, which is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. There's a few film photos of it that I took. I tried to edit up. They weren't quite working. So I had just like this memory of a kitchen window, of like the brightness and how I remembered it. And I've been interested. I was watching, Dolly come out. I was watching like the very rough versions around 2022 of some of these generative AI platforms. Super, super rough. Super, super not amazing. I heard of Midjourney, and I saw some of these Midjourney images that make you go, oh, whoa, that's pretty, that looks really good. I'm scared, you know? But I started seeing and following that, like, you could take your own reference images and feed it into Midjourney. So essentially, it's working based off the specific photo you've given it. So I did this for this specific window painting I was wanting to do. I had this image of my grandparents' house. I had a few other images of just like windows and the way I kind of remember the curtains going. I mashed them all together and I asked Midjourney to just essentially blend these images together. And I added a little description of just kind of like, oh, you know, a Midwestern farmhouse on a summer day. And when I got these images back, they were much more what I had in mind. And, you know, when you're seeing AI images for the first time, you're like, oh, wow, whoa, but it's not right. You're like, it's so close, but it's not the location. It's not right, but it feels like it. And this just got my mind wondering a lot for what this means, because I was so focused on how this program is soullessly and mechanically just like taking pieces of my descriptions to plug in and try to give me what I want. And it's wrong. It's uncanny. And I'm so focused on what does this mean? What does the descriptions mean? How is it interpreting Midwestern? How is it interpreting rural? How is it interpreting grandma's house? So it just opened up so many broad ideas. And I was just so enamored by this place I've made that was an amalgamation of my reference photos. But when I say things like Midwestern rural, what images is it referencing there? What has somebody uploaded online that it has connected those dots with? So it sends me down this path of what does making meaning mean? How do we communicate in a certain way? There's so many ways that I could. How much longer we got? Because I could talk about this for way too long. I think a lot of this I think of Renee Magritte. I hope I'm saying that right. It's the treachery of images. It's the this is not a pipe. I think a lot of that disconnect of like this is a representation of a place. It's not actually the place. And so going down that rabbit hole and exploring more of this use it's just opened up so many more broad things than simply like painting directly a photo I've taken, because it starts asking these questions of like, how are we teaching these things to correctly show what we communicate to it? What does this mean for images in the future? What does this mean for representation? And then a lot of just like, what does this mean for the creative process? I'm very much of the opinion that AI can't actually make authentic art. I think it's up to a human being to put meaning behind it. We want meaning. We want a heavy hand on the creative process. Like I was saying earlier, I'm bossy. I have a vision in mind that like, I think a lot of creatives get scared about like, no, we can't just hand this over to a machine. We can't just hand this over to a platform. It's soulless. It's without meaning. I still think we can have meaning. We can have our heavy hand on the creative process. I'm using it in this way because I'm just so interested in this uncanny nature of crafting these scenes. And what does that mean? What does that mean when you look at this place and it's physically painted, it's physically made of a lot of items, but, you know, it's constructed a small part hand in hand with how an AI algorithm sees grandma's house on a summer day, if that makes sense. I feel like I kind of rambled a little bit there.
So just looking to the future now, then, what projects do you have, Sid, that you're working on? Do you have any workshops or shows coming up? Where can we find your work publicly?
Yes. So I will have two pieces that are going to be in the group show Surreal Salon at Jackson Judge Gallery in Chicago. That is going to be, I wish I had that exact date down. I will be posting on my socials. It's going to be early October. I have the date right here. But yep, I will have two pieces there. There is also potentially a solo show for 2025 in the works. So fingers crossed on that one. I'm very motivated to try to make a pretty large body of work for that. But yes, that group show will be starting October 11th.
And what are you most looking forward to in the months ahead?
Oh, being here, kind of like working on my own, and being so new to all of this, I've had moments of almost kind of like, I wonder if other artists feel this. You kind of sit back and you're like, what am I doing? I've got an office full of paintings. Are they going to go anywhere? The opportunities that have come my way and the reception to actually have people interested in seeing more is just a big motivation I need to really start crafting and feeling a little bit more purpose behind it. I mean, before I had any interest, I was still making art. I will still always like try to make things and be interested in making things, but having things like this group show and having things like a solo show to look forward to and have something specifically to make for it. I love that idea of just trying to make a cohesive body of work. So I'm very excited about 2025 and some of the work to come.
Well, thank you, Sid, for taking the time to share your journey with us, and good luck wherever your future journey may take you with your artwork.
Hey, thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk to you.
And you can find out more about Sydney's fascinating portfolio on her website, and we'll have the link in the show notes for that, as well as a link to her social media and also to our Instagram. There's also our email address on our show notes too, if you prefer to drop us a line via email. We always love to hear from you. And if you have any suggestions for guests, we're already booking for 2025. That will be season 3 after our holiday break. So do drop us a line at hollowellstudios@gmail.com. And also you can post your comments, of course, on Instagram and send us a message there. My thanks again to my guest this week, Sydney Swisher. And also to you for listening, because I know there's a lot of choices out there when it comes to podcasts. So I really appreciate you tuning in every week. And also, I would love it if you would share this with anyone who you think might enjoy the show too. I'll be back next week when my guest will be the American wildlife filmmaker, biologist and conservationist Jocelyn Stokes. So I do hope you'll join me then.